Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Nishcast. It's your boy, the Niggly Dog, Mr. Papatoe, Panther, Mr. Slippers, here with the Wobbly Wildcard for another episode of the Nishcast. We have on the agenda some little kōrero around the New Zealand NBL, that's the National Basketball League in Aotearoa, and we also have the Wildcards Flying Kiwis desk is lit up with Christmas lights because there are a couple of football competitions that are either in action, coming into action, or looking at action in the next couple of years. They'll get back some stage, hopefully, won't they, Wildcard?
Well, eventually, if you wait long enough, you know. It's kind of funny seeing the difference between these teams where, like, it's not teams, some of these leagues where, like, some of them are clearly pushing into next season in order to finish the season. It's a bit of a strange priority, but whatever.
Yeah, I think I was just, I saw that Andrew Durante little note he did about the ALeague, and it just seems like there's bit of a kerfuffle there, and I think you're going to write about that in our email newsletter today, so sign up to be able to check out the Wildcards' thoughts on that. Is that the premise?
It's part of the premise. I didn't see the Durante thing until, like, after I'd already seen a tweet that I saw first, but like all the news about ALeague actually having this plan now in place, and this is what they want to do. They want to start in like mid-July, I think, and finish mid-August, just like get the whole thing out of the way in just a little, like, I think it's like 35 days they want to finish the rest of the season, and this came like less than 24 hours after Andrew Durante's, I think it was an Instagram post where he was just ragging on how there's no plan and no cohesiveness and no leadership and stuff with the FFA and all that. So I don't know, maybe he snapped them into attention, or maybe he should have just waited another day. However it goes, I mean, it's still very far from in the clear because there's all now this drama with broadcasters. So how exactly the A-League moves forward is I mean, they have a plan, but it's not exactly like written in permanent ink yet.
There's the premise. We also have, we'll talk about some NBL, we'll talk about some Flying Kiwis matters, and we are publishing our email newsletter at the moment today, so sign up to that for a couple of bits and bobs straight to your email, or support the Niche Cache on Patreon as well. That's the best way to support us moving forward, straight up the guts, and you get a direct line of contact to the Niche Cache and the Niche Cast and all things niche. Now, Wildcard, we have done our NRL preview episode of the Niche Cast. That's all published and live everywhere. We did a big Warriors versus Dragons preview in that, and last night, Thursday night, we had a first NRL restart game. The Eels absolutely smoked the Broncos. What, hard and fast, what were some things that stood out for you? I've got one major takeaway from that game, but I'll let you take the floor first.
Well, I had two major takeaways from the game. I don't know if either of them were also the same one as your one. I mean, just sort of like prefacing it, I'll say I found it bloody enjoyable. I thought it was a pretty good game. It was nice and fast paced. They had the thing about they made a big deal about the tackle reset rule for the ruck infringements or whatever, and just like I didn't need reminding about it every 5 minutes or whatever, but it did actually seem to make almost too much of a difference. I thought, like, it really sped the game up in a way which didn't allow defenses to get set. If you give away a couple penalties in a hurry, then you're in big trouble. Although I guess that was always the case. I don't know. But it's the one ref thing combined with that probably made the most deal. But I mean, I didn't have a worry with any of that. I thought it's fine. People are going to talk about it a whole lot because that's the way the NRL thing works, the whole cycle, whatever. The two things that I thought were most sort of interesting about it was, one, you had this, especially at the start of the game, just this like constant referral to, like, so I got a bit annoyed watching Bundesliga football where they kept mentioning the thing about how there's no crowds. In the NRL, they went almost the opposite of direction. They kept talking about how there's 300 million Americans going to be watching it right now. And like, it's really though, like what's the time in New York at 10 p.m. on a Thursday night in New Zealand? I don't think that's like prime sport watching viewing. I'm pretty sure it's probably in the middle of the night. Like, I don't think very many Americans are going to be watching the NRL just because it's on Fox Sports over there or whatever it was. I think they're probably going to be asleep. So that thing got annoying because I always get a bit frustrated when that kind of thing. When you see like teams and broadcasters and things like that trying, obviously it's a marketing type thing. I mean, there's a feel good thing about growing the game, but also when you just see them like openly flirting with people who aren't like particularly interested, and it seems to come sometimes at the expense of the people who are interested, which is always a little bit of a grating thing. You might have some thoughts on that. And the other one is the thing about the fake crowd noise, which at first I didn't notice. Then once I noticed it, I couldn't unhear it. It was one of those things where like once you're aware of it, it's suddenly like the only thing you can focus on. But I actually thought it wasn't too bad. Like it's a little bit cringy in terms of the idea, but I actually thought because it was subtle enough that, I mean, to be fair, I didn't notice it at the start. So because it was subtle enough, I think it actually worked quite well. I think it kind of like complemented I mean, I don't know. I assume it's being played over. I don't know, actually. Is it just being played over the broadcast or is it being played at the stadium as well? I don't know. So I don't think the players would care one way or the other. But it does. I thought it worked quite nicely on the broadcast, actually. So I don't think that was a terrible idea, but it springs up a whole lot of questions. Like, where did they get the crowd noise from? Did they just have this like in the banks? Is there a sound effect things? I know there are a lot of those like sound effects companies out there. Are there those that specify in like 80 minutes worth of crowd noise? Is there a guy sitting there with one of those old fashioned, like, you know, those radio machines where you got the different buttons with the different sound effects, and he's just sitting there pressing buttons like, there's a penalty being given against the home team. Where's the boo the ref button? Okay, here we go. Where's the like try's been scored? Hooray! We'll press that one. Like standing applause. Like, I don't know how intricate they made it. I couldn't really focus on it to that degree. It wasn't quite prominent enough for that, which is probably a good thing. But yeah, man, it's got me confused.
I think you're thinking way too much about canned crowd noise. But my major one was
exactly that's the problem.
Well, that's your problem. I viewed that as Andrew Voss's worst performance, and it was absolutely cringeworthy. Usually, this is my major takeaway: is just how, for the first time in my life, I actually felt really bad about Andrew Voss as a commentator, and it was just very gimmicky, very basically all the stuff you were alluding to with pandering up to America, like that was Andrew Voss, and that was my major takeaway. It was just a very poor performance from Andrew Voss. Like all the footy stuff will come out in the weeds over the next few days, and as I write about it and talk about it, a couple of interesting Kiwi NRL performances, and obviously the rules. Like everyone, first game, it's going to take a lot of shit to adjust to rules that have basically changed the way rugby league is played mid-season. That's just the NRL being geniuses as they usually are. But yeah, just, you're better off just, the combination, like if you got that kind of commentary happening and then you've got the weird stuff with the crowd noises and all that, you're better off just listening to music. So hopefully when you get other commentators, I do like a lot of the other commentators, like Michael Ennis, the expertise offered by some of the greatest players and that stuff. But, oh yeah, just cringeworthy. Everything old mate Vossi said was just cringe. It was cringe, and not in a good way. Just like, bro, just chill out. Like, because it used to be great. Like, that's why we like Vossi, there was a bit of cringe to go with the very rugby league nature of it, and then it just got a bit too much last night. So that was my major thought.
Yeah, like Vossi's the dude who, in amongst all the rugby league old boys, and most of the other commentators were players, but they do have that one dude in each commentary team who's a straight up broadcaster. But Vossi always stood himself apart, and still does. I'm not saying he's over the hill or anything now because of one bad game, but he's the dude who's like just this unabashed love for rugby league, and that's an infectious thing from him. It's just that when he's trying to sell it to Americans and talking about how Donald Trump might be watching in the White House, like it's not funny or fun. I don't know what's going on there. So yeah, I got to agree with you. I thought Vossi so it goes. Hopefully this is just a novelty, though. I think that'll fade off after a week or two.
That actually raises I think it's reflective of a wider ideal as well with rugby league and with the NRL, just to digress down this tangent. The rugby league and the NRL needs to fully take care of its backyard before looking out to the broader horizon. So you think back to the Denver test and all the rumors about rugby league games being played in the USA and stuff like that. Well, how about more effort is put into establishing rugby league in Aotearoa? How about more effort is put into establishing rugby league actually in the Pacific Islands, as opposed to a more surface level appreciation for the Pacific Islands? How about more effort is actually put into pumping up rugby league in England and Europe and Africa and Jamaica, and Jamaica's actually got a rugby league team that goes all right. South Africa played an international last year. Of course USA plays, but USA is the most convoluted market there is. A lot of these other countries, like South Africa, would absolutely froth over full-scale rugby league. The Pacific Islands, if there was a more established, more ingrained rugby league culture there, it would be better for the international game. So I think in the case of pandering up to the USA strictly in the bubble of commentating in that game, that does reflect a lot of rugby league and NRL ideals about international growth and expansion. The way I see it is they want to expand, but they want to go for the jugular, and they're missing out not just a couple steps, they're missing out hundreds of steps just to slow and steady build rugby league up. So anytime you, for the listeners, anytime you see or hear stuff about rugby league expansion into a big nation like USA, that is absolutely up shit's creek right now. USA is fucking fucked. But anytime you hear rugby league and USA and international expansion, think to yourself, okay, but what's an easier target? What's an actual realistic target that is actually genuinely going to help rugby league? Because just going into USA doesn't necessarily help the NRL or rugby league. So I think it was just an interesting microcosm of the attitude of those type of people involved in the NRL and rugby league, and how they view international expansion, because they completely ignore all the parties who have actually invested in rugby league, where the best case for international expansion is.
Well, I'll chuck another one out there as well. Why not expand rugby league a little further within Australia beyond those two main states? There's plenty of room there too. It's one of those, gotta walk before you run kind of things, eh? Because you gotta wonder why, what's so special about America that America keeps being mentioned? Surely it was being broadcast in other countries as well. I get that it was a bit more of a unique thing in America, and it was on a major channel, so it was a bit more, I guess, privileged, broadcast position to be in as well. But what's so special about America? Is America... I go back and forth on this, actually, because I think the NRL has a lot in common with the NFL in a few ways, and that goes beyond just a few shared team nicknames as well. I think there's genuinely, even in the two sports, I think when people talk about rugby union pushing into America as well, because they're no different, it's the same thing. Everyone seems to want to push into America. Football's been trying to do it for about 30, 40, 50 years. And still, they're getting there, but America doesn't have a very good football, or soccer, as they would say, culture of their own. It's sort of an imported one, but still, they do at least have a couple decent, leagues, and their women's stuff is obviously extraordinary, but on the male side of it, it's quite weird. And I think a lot of Americans view soccer as a female game because they're weird and they think that sports are gendered like that, which obviously is not true, but whatever. But like, yeah, I do think there's commonalities, but I don't know if those commonalities mean that like League is just a much better product to sell to Americans because it's closer to NFL, or if it's a much worse product because it's closer to NFL, so they just prefer the NFL, which you're never, ever, ever, ever going to compete with. And I lean a bit more towards the latter. I understand the sort of optimistic side of the former, but rugby league's not in any position to be jumping at that kind of market share right now. So, but I mean, it's clearly just they just got dollar signs in their eyes. They think, well, if it does take hold, though, imagine what we could do. And then ignoring the foundations that are crumbling because you're not paying attention to them, kind of thing. It's the Australian NBL, I think, has had a few of these kind of flirtations with China as well. It's not a coincidence that it's always these major global powerhouse countries that are involved with huge populations. And I think the Premier League does it in basically every market in the world. If you watch those back when we used to have that Premier League channel, they used to do a lot of things involving fans, and there was a lot of stuff going on in India as well, which has got a huge Premier League fandom kind of thing and not as strong of a local football scene. So yeah, I don't know. It's bloody just dollars, isn't it? It's just dollar signs in the eyes.
It just comes down to the NRL isn't even in like a big thing in every single Australian state. So yeah, just how about you look after your own backyard before looking around the world. We have a couple of interesting little Kiwi sports topics, players, competitions that are front of mind for you. Wildcard. We got the New Zealand NBL, the National Basketball League. What I find interesting about the NBL restarting is the funky initiatives they've got to get it restarted and to broadcast it. You've got a draft, you've got various real and kind of fake teams, like new teams that didn't exist before or whatever, coming in, and then you've got this broadcasting pay-per-view system to share the NBL. How are you assessing this general package of the NBL being delivered to people post-pandemic? And it's just with the stuff that they've discussed, like it's already the most funky, the most creative sports competition in Aotearoa at this time. Like they've really taken initiative to do something with the NBL post-pandemic. So how do you just assess all the little nooks and crannies and impact and all that stuff with regards to the NBL in Aotearoa?
Well, you know how you said that the NRL commentary was getting cringy enough that it's better off just like chucking your headphones on, listening to some music or something. I spent the second half of that game listening to the draft Q&A that Hugh Bainin and Andrew Price do on their Limited Minutes podcast. I was listening to that instead and getting up to date on that, because basically up until that point I had paid minimal attention to the New Zealand NBL and how they were trying to function, because I just didn't have time to be a part of the drama, you know. And you had all these things like there were 3 teams that dropped out, didn't want to be a part of it. There's players saying they weren't interested, like there are a lot of top players where there was a thing on the news, weren't interested in playing in a shortened format when it was going to risk their, like with condensed games and injury risks and stuff like that. Not the guys who had Australian NBL contracts anyway, and you've since had the Breakers announcing that none of their players are going to be playing, which obviously came through the mouthpiece of Mr. Matthew Walsh, who's always the one who says anything about anything which relates to the Breakers, and he said it was this was just the players all came to this decision. I don't know how much solidarity was involved. I don't know if the Breakers had any, they obviously wouldn't have wanted their guys playing anyway, so I don't know exactly how that works, but it is a bit frustrating, and it was like seeing, and you also have a few notable Tall Blacks who are in the country at the moment who haven't declared for the draft yet, as I think there's still time. I think that's still ongoing, that process. and it is a funky old situation. Like, they're really shaking things up because a lot of players aren't going to be available because 3 of the teams aren't going to be available, even though another team has popped up. Formerly, I think they were called the Southern Huskies, and now the Auckland Huskies moved to New Zealand. They were in it was Tasmania or something, wasn't it? So there's, I mean, it's weird. It's out of the box, but I think, and you also had a lot of like conflicting opinions on the thing. I think now the dust is settling though, and you're seeing that like the NBL just decided they had to have a competition one way or another. This was not only like a necessity, but also, I guess, an opportunity for them. Nothing to lose in that matter. So they've come up with this scheme of like I think it's a I think it's about a 6-week tournament where you're going to cram in like 10 games a week, 2 games per night on every night, except for Fridays and Mondays. I guess that's just to split the week nicely in half, so you got some rest days and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of games here in a short amount of time. The money won't be comparative to what players would get. Anyone who's got an overseas contract, it's going to be nothing near that. And it is going to be a little bit tricky as well with some of the guys because that's not a fully professional league. So like some of the veteran players of that league won't be available because they will literally have day jobs to do. So it's tricky, and to combat that, they've come up with the funkiest aspect of all of this, which is having a draft system. So, and I don't know that I really need to go through all the intricacies of the draft because that might take a while, but it's not a pure thing where like teams just get to pick at random each player. Like, there are sort of procedures, and you can pre-select players, use a draft pick to sign a player that you already had under contract, or a player that is like local from your region. Like, there's things like that to sort it out, which ends up, I think it's quite an interesting thing. And I'd certainly got to appreciate the way that they've gone all out and just like full on creative and out of the box thinking. And then they've got this broadcast thing so that people can watch it from overseas because I mean, basketball, unlike rugby league in America, basketball around the world has a major foothold all over the place. It's one of the most popular sports on the planet, and there's bugger all basketball going on at the moment. So there is maybe a little bit of an option there. I don't know how much money they'll actually make from that kind of thing, but it's interesting, and it's creative, and it's ambitious, and I like those things. I'm not going to come out and say it's going to be the best possible product, because it's not. Most of the best players just simply aren't going to be playing, but it's certainly piqued my interest over the last few days, and I got to applaud the ambition of it all.
Would there be like anything in the way this is being set up in the operations and logistics? Is there any like whether it's a glaring key crucial thing, or if it's a more undercover low key thing? Is there something that you would point out for just casual sports fans to tap into, tune into, pay attention to with regards to the NBL?
Well, I think that draft, which they're hoping to televise and everything, I think that's going to be the most interesting and unique of all the aspects of it. I mean, all the games are going to be live on Sky, and they're all going to be on at different times. I think it's like a 5:30 game and a 7:30 game or something each of those nights that I mentioned. Like every night, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, and then Saturday, Sundays. So there's plenty of, there should be plenty of saturation, as Stringer Bell might say, market saturation. So it's out there. It's going to be viewable. It's going to be. The one thing that seems like the overwhelming negative, like there's a lot of things they've had to make compromises with, which is understandable, and you're not going to please everybody, also understandable. And I think overall they've come out with a positive result, but I am disappointed by a lot of the more high profile players that aren't going to be playing or whatever. It's like, well, you don't even know when the Australian NBL is going to be coming back. I think Jared Kenny's signed, though. I think that's one dude. They are hopeful for some others. I guess there's also complications for, like, Alex Pledger lives in Australia at the moment, because he's been playing for Melbourne. So there's a complication there. He'd have to get back. I think Mika Pekona lives in Brisbane. There'll be a few others. Toya Smith-Milner is also another one who's registered for it. it was one of those funny things where on that podcast, on that Limited Minutes podcast, someone also mentioned like, was there thought of getting a Breakers team involved in this as well, so they're actually like part of it, or get the Breakers development players? And then Bainham was like, well, the Breakers only have one development player, and it's Terry Lee. One of those, one of those weird things about the Breakers. I think I don't exactly know what to think about the Breakers part in all of this, by the way, because like, it's very easy to look at them just not being a part of it, and them. I think there was a tweet I saw, which is how I saw that they were gonna be this way, and it was like, Breakers players won't be taking part, but we, send all our best wishes and support to the NBL and hope it does brilliantly and whatever. It's like, yeah, but the Breakers over the last 2 years will basically like come out and say it plainly, like the Breakers under this ownership have always said nice things about wishing the best for New Zealand basketball and done bugger all to prove it. And we just look at those development players and the lack of, that used to be an option. They used to have 3 development players a year. Often it would be like young Kiwi dudes preparing to go to college. Like Isaac Fotu did it once back in the day, I'm pretty sure. Dan Fotu did it more recently. Tai Webster was one of those fellas. I think Tai Wynyard might have been as well. Tai Wynyard's signed up for this Kiwi NBL. He's definitely a player I'd like to have a look at, because his career has gone in a very strange place since he signed for Kentucky, and then since he did no longer played for Kentucky after a while and had a little incident on campus and a whole lot of weirdness. It would have been really bloody cool to get some of those Breakers dudes involved in playing. I understand why they're not, but I'm also like, I withhold judgment, because there's obvious reasons why those, their actual livelihoods might be at risk, especially guys like Corey Webster, for example, who could easily get contracts overseas as well in his off season. Like, he's got to keep, and who has had injury worries in recent times. Like, it's very obvious that he's probably making the smart, cautious decision, but it is a little bit disappointed not to see more buy-in from the top players. But yeah, I guess you got to also say it's understandable, but you just do what you can with the guys you got, I guess. There are some, like Jack Salt's going to be playing, he's another one, so there are some like top tier Kiwi basketballers who will be involved in this.
Was Tai Wynyard, I'm not sure how much he played for Kentucky, whether he did actually play.
It was like maximum 3 minutes a game sort of thing. But he was in the team for a while there.
So he was playing alongside Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Kevin Knox.
He might have been, I can't remember.
And Hamidou Diallo. Those are the names that stick out as NBA off the top of my head. NBA names I know of or have heard of. So, although the tweet that I'm looking at listing what I think is the Kentucky roster from 2018 does have Tai Wynyard right at the bottom. So, shout out to Tai Wynyard.
Well, it could just be alphabetical order.
It's definitely alphabetical order, so keep that in mind.
Yeah, so actually no judgment on him at all in that regard. But he has had a weird career, because he had that thing where like his mate there was some weird incident where like he went to a party with a friend and his friend was carrying a gun, and then it got turned into a thing and he got suspended for it, and then he ended up getting transferred to a different school, and then I think he was last NBL season he turned up as like a development player for Cairns, Perth, Adelaide, one of those teams, one of the Aussie teams, I can't remember, and I looked it up to see how much he played, and it was like, again, like maximum a couple minutes. The development players don't often get a lot of minutes. You only get them like on the court at the very end of games if you happen to be winning by 20 or something like that. But yeah, I mean, from playing for one of the very top schools in America, and then I think he redshirted his first year, so he had to like sit out. He was training, but he couldn't play, kind of thing. So then he comes into the team, only plays a few minutes, then he has some dramas, and then leaves, and then he's back in Australia, and now he's playing he's like NZMBL again. He's played a couple other seasons, but and in between that, he went to an under-19 World Cup with New Zealand where he was outstanding. He was probably New Zealand's best player at that World Cup too. So again, another thing I don't know what to think about is the career of Tai Wynyard. But again, like young dudes, plenty of time, maybe these kind of, hopefully he'll get a good old prominent role in this one. He can like push his way through to a full NBL contract or something.
Who is the best basketball player in Aotearoa who plays not overseas, and we'll factor in the breakers, but maybe less about the breakers. Like, who is like maybe the best domestic and Australian League player, if you catch my drift here? Like, not the blatantly obvious Stephen Adams or Isaac Fotu or Corey Webster. Or...
Yeah, so not Stephen Adams, not Fotu, or I don't know, I'd probably say Corey Webster if he counts, being a Breakers registered player. I don't know, I'd have to think about it otherwise. It's one of those tricky ones where it sort of depends on what you're looking for in terms of best. I mean, Corey Webster's easily the best, like, top peak of, but I'm wording this terribly, but he's the guy with the highest ceiling, I guess, but he's also not necessarily the most consistent. I mean, it would be him, or maybe you could make a case for a Thomas Abercrombie. I don't think Thomas Abercrombie has played to his potential for a couple years. So he had some very good moments actually last season, but again, it was their whole team was inconsistent, so you can't blame any one player for that. Probably something along those lines.
Who is the best footballer from Aotearoa, male or female, who will be playing football in the next 2 months?
Who will be playing football in the next 2 months? Well, I think the NWSL is going to start up within then, so probably Abby Erceg, although also the Premier League's coming back, so you can chuck Chris Wood in there as well. So you got a male and a female, and it's the same answers that it would be in the regular old times as well.
We know that the Bundesliga is up and running, but there's no... Sarpreet Singh isn't playing, and I assume the lower levels of the Bundesliga aren't playing.
Well, they weren't playing, but they're about to be playing. I think it's 3 weeks since the Bundesliga started, and now, after 3 weeks, I guess that's set enough of a standard that the top women's league because it was the Bundesliga and the second division have been playing. Now the third division's going to come in. I think everything below that has already been cancelled, including the second tier of the women's league as well. But the top tier of the women's league is coming back. So that means Michaela Moore back in action. That means Paige Satchel back in action. That also means Sarpreet Singh for the Bayern Munich reserves back in action. And with a lot of games to play over a short amount of time. So he's already the second top goal scorer for that team and the leading assist maker. So he can push both those numbers into double figures now. I think he's got 7 goals, 6 assists, something along those lines from about 20 games, which is an outstanding. If you're creating more than, like, if your goals plus assists playing in midfield as well adds up to more than like a goal every second game, then you're doing pretty outstandingly, I reckon, in my books anyway. And Sarpreet Singh is well above that for the Bayern reserves. And against all odds, because I didn't think they were going to bother to bring back third tier football, but they are, and he's going to get a chance to play a little bit more and do his thing some more.
So everyone would have been thinking, the Bundesliga's back, we're going to watch Sarpreet Singh, like more casual, like this.
Yeah, didn't make the bench for any of their first 3 games.
Right, but there is a near future in which Sarpreet Singh is playing lower league football in Germany.
Which is the status quo for him as well. He played 8 minutes for the senior team.
Yeah, but I think in terms of
the
the lower leagues are coming back, so people thinking about Sarpreet Singh will be seeing Sarpreet Singh soon. Absolutely,
and I'm sure he'll be getting some prominent features in Flying Kiwis, which will probably have to come back this weekend because that's when those other German leagues are coming back, is this weekend.
Right, so the women involved, what women are playing in Germany with the Women's Bundesliga competition coming back?
Yeah, so more specifically, Michaela Moore is with MSV Duisburg, and they are sort of in a little bit of a relegation scrap. They're slightly on the top end of the relegation scrap, so they have hopes that they can get a couple good results, push themselves through to safety. That'll be sweet as. And Paige Satchel is with SC Sand, who are mid-table, nothing really to play for, won't finish anywhere near European spots, not in danger of relegation, but they are in a cup quarterfinal, so they could potentially make a little bit of a cup run throughout the rest of the season, because the cup stuff is also coming back, same as I would have thought they just can cup football or like altogether, but even in the Premier League are looking to keep going with the FA Cup and all that. In fact, the FA Cup's still going to be the last game of the season for them. So, yeah, there's your trio in Germany. You've also got Jana Radosavljevic, who is a division lower at Kloppenburg, but they, that league has been cancelled, same as the Women's Super League in England, by the way, and everything below that in England. Women's football won't. They've taken the opposite view, which is disappointing, in which we don't get to see more games, but also I'm surprised more leagues haven't taken this, which is like, we're just going to cancel the rest of this season and focus on starting next season nice and strong and ready and perfect, whereas like the Premier League is going to be finishing after the point where next season would have already started, like a couple weeks into next season anyway, so they're just going to be creating problems even more down the line, which, yeah, it's all a bit bloody complicated, but it's all starting to come back as well. Like, dates are being set and stuff. It's also, I guess, an exciting time as well as a frustrating one.
Venturing into some more obscure, like, what are some of them? We've got flying Kiwis, men and women, around the world. So what are the more obscure competitions or obscure nations that involve Kiwis that are also on your radar?
Yeah, I think the best answer to that would probably be the various Scandinavian leagues, where like you've got a few contrasting things, because Sweden like famously didn't do a full lockdown at all. Other countries in Scandinavia did. Ironically, now Sweden is the country having the most trouble in trying to get their football back, even though they never even cancelled it in the first place. They just postponed it a couple weeks, and then when they expected to start it, which is in about 2 weeks' time from now, they're still waiting for some red tape to get cleared from the authorities, but so it goes. Sweden, you got like Matty Garbitz at Falkenbergs. You got guys like, I think Joel Stevens is a division below that. Francis de Vries I think he still is, I'm not sure, at the same club as Joel Stevens actually. And then you've got like a few tiers down below that, the Ole Academy fellas, although I don't think they're starting those leagues. I think they might not get to happen because they're a bit too far down the ladder. But I mean, that's Sweden. You've also got Norway, where there's a Kiwi in the top division of both the male and the female. CJ Bott's playing for a team called Vålerenga. I have absolutely no idea how these teams are pronounced, by the way, but just reading them phonetically. And Joe Bell is with Viking, so couple very prominent, probably first 11 players at this point for, even though they might still be slightly obscure names. To the less intense Kiwi football fan, those are probably both like Bott and Bell, probably each first 11 starters for the Football Ferns and All Whites respectively, whenever they eventually ever play again, which might not be for a little while. I don't know what the state of international football is going to be. I doubt we'll see anything in the rest of 2020. Which is par for the course for the All Whites. They never bloody play anyway. And then, what other countries are there in Scandinavia? Betsy Hassett's been playing in Iceland. I think she signed with a different team in Iceland, but is staying in that division. I don't actually know what the state of their football league is at the moment. Denmark is hoping to come back this weekend, though. Denmark's a little different because these other countries run year-on things, like just single-year competitions, whereas others run it through the other season where it's like crossing over the New Year's at the halfway point kind of thing. So Denmark is already 2/3 of the way through their season. No one in the top flight at the moment, but you do have Nico Boxall's team is pushing for promotion to that point. You've also got a division below that where Elijah Just and Dalton Wilkins are at that weird team run by Americans and who are trying to build that team up. So they're looking for promotion. I'm not sure if that third tier is playing yet. The second test should be, Nico Boxall should be in action this very coming weekend. So, what have I said? Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Iceland. No one's in Finland. That's all of those countries, isn't it? I think so.
You've hit the old Viking territory there with a bit of the flying Kiwis. Do you have any
liking the Vikings?
Do you have any thoughts or anything to share on footy inside Aotearoa? Obviously, the local premiership runs over summer, so that's nicely positioned. Grassroots footy will be grassroots footy, and I'm sure everyone will be frothing at the bit to get back to that. But there's nothing else. There's no real grand impact on football in Aotearoa from this, considering that the local domestic league isn't really a winter competition, correct?
No, yeah. The National League is run over the summer months and was cancelled a little bit ahead of time. They skipped the playoffs. Auckland City were announced as winners. This is way back when, at the very start of the thing. They only missed out on a round or two. Obviously there's no point in postponing that like the Premier League and then picking it up later on. But yeah, the winter season has been affected. Like, the games would be well underway at this point ordinarily. I think the Northern Leagues, for example, are looking to come back in 2 weeks' time, I think. They'll be back in training already. Well, they've been for a little while in smaller groups. I think the way they're going is they're just going to play one round sort of thing. Instead of playing every team home and away, you'll play every team home or away. And then last I heard they were going to do then split it halfway through and have the top half play each other again and the bottom half play each other again, just so you don't have to, to make up for the fixtures that they lost, you don't play every single team both times. But don't think that's a massive, for one thing, they're not allowed fans at the moment anyway, so it's not going to be a massive supporter thing. It really only affects the players and the people involved. I can tell you, I had football training last night. That's an important one for everyone to understand. Bit rusty, but so it goes. I think the most important thing around these parts is the Wellington Phoenix, though, and the ALeague are trying to come back. Like we mentioned it a bit at the start of the podcast, the ALeague have a plan. They want to start things up in mid-July. They want to finish them by mid-August. They think they can finish the entire rest of the season within 35 days, which they should be able to. The PFA, the FFA, and the ALeague itself, I think, have all been in negotiations, working these things out. Unfortunately, the broadcasters are kicking up a fuss and being obstructive about things as broadcasters. I mean, throughout this whole process, especially in Australia, but I think the Premier League have had massive troubles with similar kind of things, and throughout the whole thing of trying to figure out how to move forward with sports, just on an absolute general trend, broadcasters, in my eyes, seem to have come off absolutely terrible. Broadcasters are showing themselves up to be greedy bastards and getting in the way and not working for the good of the sport like they pretend to be, which, fair enough, you're running a business, but, don't claim to be something you're not, at the same time. It just seems like there's so many stories of broadcasters just being a pain in the ass when it comes to these things, when there's already enough valid reasons to worry as it is with player welfare and things like that, much more important things, and then to also have these other hurdles to have to jump because people are just being greedy about things and saying, no, you have to refund us our £300 million or whatever it is, like the case in the Premier League. You're still going to get all those games even if they've been delayed. I don't know. It's been just a recurring theme of all this, is just broadcasters being dumb.
Yeah, so Piney tweeted something yesterday that just says FFA, A-League clubs and PFA have reached an agreement for the restart of this season. Just waiting on the broadcasters' approval. Trainings mid-June, games mid-July, and then all wrapped up by mid-August. So that is effectively confirmation of what you just said.
Which is good news. I mean, especially for the Phoenix. And I think the reason, because I just wrote a thing about the state of play earlier this week, which already 3 or 4 of those things would need updates. The American stuff as well, the NWSL there have come up with an NBL level of creative thinking to get their stuff back, and not always in a good way either, I don't think. Like, they're just going to play all the games in a tournament style thing. They're going to do it like the World Cup, split the teams into two groups and then have quarterfinals and stuff, and maybe they'll have a league afterwards, but they specifically want to have this tournament competition because they're aiming to be the first major sport back, which, I mean, considering how strong the women's international team is coming out of America, their club league just doesn't get the same support. I don't know why. I think it's because Americans are fickle and stupid and want to just support the winners, and they don't understand how club teams work and things like that. Especially when, like, women's football club, like, that league has been up and down in a few different incarnations, so it's not necessarily the most stable of things either. But the MLS has similar problems. But yeah, they've come up with this weird. What I don't like about it is they're going to play all the games in a short amount of time on an artificial pitch, and it's just like, just don't play football on artificial pitches when you don't have to. Like, unless you're in a snowbound country, it's not worth it. It's pretty clear at this point that injuries are higher, and injuries are already higher in women's football as well. Like, there's like serious research about the proliferation of knee injuries and stuff among women's footballers. It's actually kind of like frightening how common that can be. Think of the football ferns preparing for the last World Cup. You had Olivia Chance and Hannah Wilkinson both coming back from that injury, and Amber Hearn unable to come back from that injury just for that one World Cup. Like, 3 players affected in that by that same, by having to have knee surgery. Like, yeah, not a massive fan of that part of the thing, but I do quite like the thing about getting back into action ahead of everyone else and showing that they can do it and whatever, and that's cool. Lots of Kiwi players involved in that, but yeah, I forget where I started with this point now. What was I saying?
Nothing more, nothing less. Anything else on your
point
any
made?
other pressing issues that you'd like to share?
No, I probably said them all, and you're welcome to say something. I feel like I've said too much on this podcast.
It's beautiful. People are soaking up your information on the local basketball and footballing matters, and I'm sure they appreciate it. So we'll bounce back next week. There may or may not be a solo Kiwi NRL wrap-up podcast. Otherwise, we're probably able to get back into our 2 episodes a week stuff that we settle upon when there is a fair amount of sports. So stay tuned to more episodes of the Nichecast, and we'll pump them out with all sorts of beautiful sporting content. How does that sound, Wildcard? Yeah,
3-hour Warriors versus Dragons debrief, you reckon?
I don't know if it, like... funny, yes. But just when you said that, I thought of a thought that I have been thinking about for a while with regards to the Warriors. Because, like, last night, that game was fast. And obviously the rule changes help that, but there is a certain intensity and speed that a lot of NRL games have. Like, obviously, if you're rolling out 2 shit teams, you're not going to have it. But a lot of the NRL games do have that visible different level of intensity and speed and physicality. Don't feel that with any Warriors games, and I haven't for a couple of years now. So it's something I've always felt that there's some games have like this. Holy shit, this game's fast and intense and physical. I'm hyped up. Can't wait to see the Warriors get into this, and it doesn't happen. Like, the Warriors just, for whatever reason, don't operate at that same intensity that a lot of the other teams do. Like, the best teams in the NRL can really get engaged in those games where they are high quality games. I can't remember off the top of my head a high quality Warriors game from like the last 18 months.
Yeah, well, not to rub it in or anything, but as I was leaving for football training last night, I walked through the lounge, the television was on, the ads were playing, and they were talking about not the ads, the promos for later on whatever channel it was, news, blah, 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 blah. And then in sport, the Warriors' upcoming opponents say that they're not taking them lightly ahead of NRL resumption, blah, blah, blah. It's like, and I saw like the little bit of a clip that they said about it, and it was like, it's like the Warriors have made such sacrifices to help get the league back, and everyone's really behind them, and they're certainly going to galvanize from that, and you know we're not going to be taking them lightly in any, like, it's just sort of this. It seemed to me, maybe I'm just being biased about the matter, but like. It was one of those things, you're not going to say anything else. Like, you're not going to say, oh, well, they're done great to, like, make the sacrifice, but they're pretty shit, so, like, we're not too worried about... Like, you don't say that in a press conference. You say the kind of things that were said. And it sounded sort of like when a kid draws a painting and then, like, draws a little picture and then shows you, look, Daddy, I drew a helicopter. Like, well, is that a helicopter? Good try, son. It's a good effort. Well, I'm glad you're trying nice and hard. You've made a lot of sacrifices in order to create this picture. It was a little bit condescending.
What's your pick? Warriors, Dragons?
Dragons by 40.
Rightio, we'll see how
That's
that goes.
That's if the Dragons turn up. They might not.
Stay beautiful. Enjoy Aotearoa. Enjoy the land. Enjoy the sky. Papatoa nuku, ranganui. And just stay positive. Cheer, cheer.